When a father and son set out for a simple Grand Canyon hiking trip to reconnect after a bitter divorce, they had no idea they would stumble into a hidden world of violence that the park authorities had been quietly covering up for years. What a lone hiker discovered in a slot canyon so remote it required expert climbing skills would reveal the horrifying truth about what really happens to visitors who wander too far from the marked trails. The divorce papers had been finalized for 8 months, but Marcus Thompson still felt the sting every time he picked up Tyler for their scheduled weekends. The awkward handoffs at Jennifer's front door, the polite but distant conversations, the way his 17-year-old son seemed to drift further away with each passing month. Marcus knew he was losing his boy, and the realization terrified him more than any architectural project deadline ever had. Standing in his Phoenix apartment that June morning in 2019, Marcus studied the Grand Canyon brochures spread across his kitchen table. The idea had come to him during one of those sleepless nights that plagued him since the separation. Tyler would graduate high school in 2 weeks, and then college would take him even further away. This trip could be their chance to reconnect, father and son against the wilderness, just like the camping trips they used to take when Tyler was younger and still thought his dad was a hero. "You serious about this, Dad?" Tyler asked when Marcus called to propose the adventure. The skepticism in his son's voice was unmistakable, but underneath it, Marcus detected a flicker of interest. 3 days in the Grand Canyon, just us. We'll take the Bright Angel Trail down to Indian Garden, camp overnight, maybe explore some of the side trails. What do you say? Tyler was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus held his breath. Since the divorce, Tyler had chosen video games and friends over their father-son time more often than not. But something about the Grand Canyon seemed to capture his imagination. "Yeah, okay. Sounds cool, I guess." Marcus grinned, feeling a surge of hope he hadn't experienced in months. He immediately began planning every detail of their adventure. He purchased top-quality hiking gear, studied trail maps until he could navigate them blindfolded, and checked weather forecasts obsessively. This trip would be perfect. It had to be. 2 weeks later, they stood together at the South Rim Visitor Center, both wearing matching orange hiking shirts Marcus had bought for the occasion. Tyler rolled his eyes at the matching outfits, but wore his without complaint. The canyon stretched before them, a vast chasm of red rock and shadows that seemed to swallow the horizon. "Ready for this, son?" Marcus asked, adjusting his bright orange backpack. Tyler pulled out his phone to take a selfie of them both, the magnificent canyon backdrop framing their smiling faces. "Let's do this, Dad." Neither of them could have imagined that within 48 hours, they would both vanish without a trace into the very wilderness they had come to conquer together. The morning of June 16th dawned crisp and clear, with temperatures in the 70s at the South Rim that would climb well above 100 degrees in the inner canyon by afternoon. Marcus and Tyler started their descent at 6:30 a.m., their boots crunching on the well-maintained gravel of the Bright Angel Trail. The early start was crucial, Marcus knew, to avoid the brutal midday heat that claimed unprepared hikers every summer. Tyler walked slightly ahead, his phone out constantly, documenting their journey with photos and short videos. The orange backpack his father had bought him looked enormous on his lean frame, packed with 3 days' worth of food, water, and camping gear. Marcus felt a surge of pride watching his son navigate the switchbacks with confidence, pointing out rock formations and wildlife tracks along the trail. "Dad, look at this view," Tyler called out at the first major overlook, holding up his phone to capture a selfie with the vast canyon stretching behind them. Marcus joined him, and for a moment, the tension that had defined their relationship since the divorce seemed to evaporate in the grandeur of the landscape. They made good time descending toward Indian Garden, the oasis campground that would be their home for the night. The trail was busier than Marcus had expected, with day hikers and other backpackers sharing the path. Tyler struck up conversations with other young hikers, his natural charisma shining through in a way that reminded Marcus of his son's childhood personality before everything became complicated. At Indian Garden, they secured their campsite and set up their tent near a grove of cottonwood trees. The temperature had climbed past 100 degrees, but the shade provided blessed relief. They spent the afternoon exploring the area, hiking to Plateau Point for spectacular views of the Colorado River far below. As evening approached, they cooked a simple dinner on Marcus's camp stove and watched the canyon walls change color in the setting sun. Tyler pulled out his phone to text his girlfriend Emma, showing her the incredible sunset painting the rocks in shades of orange and red. "This is actually pretty cool, Dad," Tyler admitted, leaning back against a rock. "I'm glad we did this." Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion. This was exactly what he had hoped for. At 7:43 p.m., Tyler sent his final text message to Emma, a photo of the sunset with the caption, "Canyon life with Dad." Pretty epic. Neither father nor son realized that this simple message would become the last trace of their existence, the final breadcrumb in a trail that would soon go completely cold in the unforgiving wilderness of the Grand Canyon. Jennifer Thompson was organizing Tyler's graduation party supplies when her phone buzzed at 12:15 p.m. on June 17th. Emma Martinez, Tyler's girlfriend, was calling with a tremor in her voice that immediately set off alarm bells in Jennifer's mind. "Mrs. Thompson, Tyler and his dad were supposed to be back by noon today," Emma said, her words rushing together with anxiety. "Tyler promised he'd call me as soon as they got out of the canyon, but I haven't heard anything." His phone goes straight to voicemail. Jennifer felt her stomach drop. Marcus was many things, but unreliable wasn't one of them. Even during their messy divorce, he had never been late returning Tyler from their scheduled time together. She tried calling both Marcus and Tyler repeatedly, but every call went directly to voicemail, the electronic voice cheerfully announcing that the subscriber was unavailable. By 2 p.m., Jennifer was driving toward the Grand Canyon, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The 3-hour drive from Phoenix felt endless, her mind cycling through increasingly frightening scenarios. Car accident on the winding canyon roads, heat stroke in the brutal summer temperatures, a fall from one of the precipitous cliff edges. At the South Rim Visitor Center, Jennifer's worst fears were confirmed. Marcus's rental car sat exactly where they had left it 3 days earlier, covered in dust and baking in the afternoon Sunday. The car was locked, undisturbed, with no signs of their return. Tyler's graduation cap, which he had tossed playfully into the back seat before starting their hike, still lay exactly where he had left it. The park rangers Jennifer spoke with were professional but clearly concerned. Missing hikers in the Grand Canyon were unfortunately common, especially during the brutal summer months, when temperatures in the inner canyon could exceed 115 degrees. But Marcus and Tyler were experienced outdoor enthusiasts who had planned their route carefully and carried proper equipment. Ranger Patricia Valdez began the process of organizing a search and rescue operation. She gathered details about their planned itinerary, their gear, and their expected return time. Every minute that passed increased the urgency of the situation. If Marcus and Tyler were injured or lost somewhere in the canyon, time was running out. As the sun began to set over the south rim, painting the canyon walls in brilliant shades of red and gold, Jennifer stood at the same overlook where her son had taken his last photograph. The beauty of the landscape felt mocking now, a vast wilderness that had swallowed her family whole. The canyon stretched endlessly before her, over 1,000 square miles of rugged terrain where two people could vanish without leaving so much as a footprint behind. The call came into Grand Canyon National Park's emergency dispatch at 3:47 p.m. on June 17th. Within minutes, the South Rim's search and rescue coordinator was mobilizing what would become one of the largest missing person operations in the park's recent history. The clock was already ticking against Marcus and Tyler Thompson, and everyone involved knew that in the desert heat of summer, hours could mean the difference between life and death. Incident Commander Sarah Chen had overseen dozens of canyon rescues during her 8 years with the Park Service. But the circumstances of this case immediately set off warning bells. Two experienced hikers with proper gear and a well-planned itinerary don't simply vanish without a trace. The fact that they had missed their planned return time by nearly 4 hours meant something had gone seriously wrong. The initial response team consisted of 12 rangers trained in technical rescue operations, supported by 2 helicopter crews equipped with thermal imaging cameras. The helicopters lifted off just as the sun began its descent toward the western rim, their rotors churning the desert air as they headed into the canyon's depths. From the air, the search area looked overwhelming. The Grand Canyon stretched for over 270 miles, with depths reaching more than a mile in some places. Countless side canyons, hidden alcoves, and treacherous cliff faces created a labyrinth where two people could disappear completely. The pilots followed the Bright Angel Trail first, scanning for any sign of the distinctive orange backpacks Jennifer had described. Ground teams rappelled into areas inaccessible by helicopter, their voices echoing off the canyon walls as they called out Marcus and Tyler's names. The Indian Garden campground was thoroughly searched, but the Thompsons' campsite showed no signs of disturbance. Their tent had been properly dismantled, and there were no personal items left behind. As darkness fell, the helicopter search was suspended for safety reasons, but ground teams continued with high-powered searchlights. The temperature in the inner canyon was still over 90 degrees at midnight, creating dangerous conditions for both the missing hikers and the searchers. Ranger Chen established a command post at the South Rim, coordinating with additional resources from neighboring counties. By dawn, on June 18th, over 30 searchers would be combing the canyon, supported by K-9 units specially trained for wilderness tracking. But the Grand Canyon is a place where people can vanish completely, swallowed by its immense scale and unforgiving terrain. Despite the massive mobilization of resources and expertise, the first 24 hours of searching yielded nothing but questions. Marcus and Tyler Thompson had seemingly disappeared into thin air, leaving behind only their abandoned rental car and the growing desperation of a mother who refused to accept that her family was gone. By the end of the third day, the massive search operation had covered over 50 square miles of some of the most challenging terrain in North America. Helicopters had flown grid patterns over every accessible canyon, while ground teams had rappelled into crevasses and explored caves that hadn't seen human visitors in decades. The effort was exhaustive, methodical, and ultimately fruitless. Incident Commander Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the South Rim as the sun set on June 19th, studying the detailed search maps spread across a folding table. Red X marks indicated areas that had been thoroughly searched. The map was covered in red marks, but Marcus and Tyler Thompson remained as invisible as if they had never existed. The Indian Garden campground had been processed like a crime scene. Every tent site was examined, every trash receptacle searched, every trail junction investigated. The Thompsons had definitely been there. Other campers confirmed seeing them, but their departure from the area remained a complete mystery. No one remembered seeing them leave, and no trail registers bore their signatures beyond the main campground area. The most puzzling aspect was the complete absence of any gear or personal items. Experienced hikers like Marcus and Tyler should have left some trace of their passage, dropped water bottles, lost gear, or at minimum, footprints in the sandy areas. But the canyon had swallowed them without leaving so much as a broken shoelace behind. K-9 units had been brought in from Phoenix and Flagstaff, their handlers working the dogs along every major trail and several off-trail routes. The dogs had picked up scent trails initially, following tracks that led from Indian Garden towards some of the more remote areas of the canyon. But invariably, the scents would fade and disappear, as if the missing hikers had simply evaporated into the desert air. Ranger Patricia Valdez, who had been hiking the Grand Canyon for over 15 years, found the case deeply unsettling. She had participated in hundreds of search and rescue operations, and even when hikers died from heat exhaustion or falls, their bodies were eventually found. The canyon was vast, but it wasn't infinite. Bodies didn't just disappear completely. The search effort began to scale back on the fourth day, as resources were redirected to other emergencies. The official position was that Marcus and Tyler had likely succumbed to the heat, and their remains would eventually be discovered, possibly years later, in some remote corner of the canyon. But privately, seasoned rangers were beginning to whisper about something more sinister. The Grand Canyon had claimed over 700 lives since record-keeping began, but those victims left traces. Marcus and Tyler Thompson had vanished as completely as if they had never entered the canyon at all. As the massive search effort wound down with no concrete results, the speculation began in earnest. Around campfires at the South Rim and in ranger stations throughout the park, theories emerged to explain the inexplicable disappearance of Marcus and Tyler Thompson. Each theory seemed to have merit, yet none could fully account for the complete absence of any trace. The heat theory gained the most traction. Among experienced canyon guides, summer temperatures in the inner canyon regularly exceeded 115 degrees, creating conditions that could quickly overwhelm even experienced hikers. Heat exhaustion led to disorientation, poor decision-making, and ultimately, death. Victims often wandered far from established trails in their delirium, seeking shade or water that didn't exist. Bodies could be hidden in countless crevasses and alcoves, slowly mummified by the desert conditions. Ranger Elena Rodriguez favored the flash flood hypothesis. The canyon slot canyons were notorious death traps during the summer monsoon season. A storm miles away could send a wall of water through narrow passages with no warning. Bodies swept away by flash floods were rarely recovered, carried deep into the Colorado River system or buried under tons of debris in remote areas. The off-trail theory suggested that Marcus and Tyler had attempted to explore unmarked areas, perhaps seeking adventure beyond the well-maintained tourist trails. The canyon contained thousands of unmapped passages, ancient Native American ruins, and hidden springs. Inexperienced explorers could easily become lost in this labyrinth, their remains scattered across inaccessible terrain. Some whispered about more sinister possibilities. The canyon attracted its share of dangerous individuals, people who chose the remote wilderness to hide from law enforcement or society. Drug smugglers used isolated areas as transportation routes, and territorial disputes sometimes turned violent. Had the Thompsons stumbled into something they weren't supposed to see? The accident theory focused on the canyon's countless opportunities for fatal falls. A single misstep near a cliff edge, a loose rock giving way, or an attempt to retrieve a dropped item could result in bodies falling into areas so remote they might never be found. The Grand Canyon had claimed over 700 lives since record-keeping began, and many victims were never recovered. Wildlife encounters remained a remote possibility. Mountain lions, though rare, inhabited the canyon's ecosystems. Bears were uncommon, but not unknown. A defensive animal protecting cubs or territory could attack without warning, dragging victims to feeding sites far from any trail. Each theory had proponents among the search teams, but none explained the fundamental mystery. Two experienced hikers with proper gear don't simply vanish without leaving any trace whatsoever. Something had happened to Marcus and Tyler Thompson that went beyond the canyon's normal catalog of tragedies. Something that would require a different kind of investigation to uncover. When FBI digital forensics specialist Agent Maria Santos received Tyler Thompson's phone data 3 days after the disappearance, she expected to find the usual breadcrumbs left by missing hikers: GPS coordinates, photo metadata, and cell tower pings that would help narrow the search area. What she discovered instead raised more questions than answers, and shifted the entire investigation in an unexpected direction. Tyler's phone had been remarkably active during their descent into the canyon on June 16th. The metadata from his photos showed a clear progression down the Bright Angel Trail, with timestamps and GPS coordinates matching their planned route perfectly. His last Instagram post at 7:43 p.m. showed him and Marcus enjoying the sunset at Indian Garden, both smiling and relaxed. But buried in the raw cell tower data was something that made Agent Santos sit up straighter at her desk. At 11:47 p.m. on June 16th, nearly 4 hours after Tyler's last text message, his phone had pinged a cell tower in a completely different area of the canyon. The signal had come from somewhere near Hermit Creek, over 12 miles from their campsite at Indian Garden. The implications were staggering. For Tyler's phone to register at that location, either he had hiked 12 miles through treacherous terrain in complete darkness, or someone else had carried his phone there. Neither scenario made sense given what they knew about Marcus and Tyler's hiking experience and their planned itinerary. Agent Santos cross-referenced the tower data with topographical maps of the canyon. The Hermit Creek area was notoriously difficult to access, requiring technical climbing skills and specialized equipment. It wasn't somewhere casual hikers would venture, especially at night. The area was also known among park rangers as a haven for illegal camping and off-grid activities. Even more puzzling was what happened next. After the 11:47 p.m. ping, Tyler's phone went completely silent. No more tower connections, no GPS signals, no data transmissions of any kind. It was as if the device had been deliberately destroyed or had somehow ended up in an area with no cellular coverage whatsoever. The digital evidence painted a disturbing picture. Tyler and Marcus had apparently left their peaceful campsite at Indian Garden and traveled through dangerous terrain to reach one of the canyon's most remote areas. The journey would have been nearly impossible to complete safely in daylight, let alone in the middle of the night. Agent Santos flagged the Hermit Creek area as a priority for the search teams, but she also began considering a more sinister possibility. The phone data suggested that whatever had happened to the Thompsons, it might not have been an accident. Someone or something had drawn them away from their planned route, into an area where they could disappear completely. The digital breadcrumbs were leading the investigation into uncharted territory, both literally and figuratively. Emma Martinez had been haunted by guilt for 5 days when she finally worked up the courage to call Jennifer Thompson back. Sitting in her bedroom in Phoenix, surrounded by photos of her and Tyler from prom just weeks earlier, she clutched her phone with trembling hands. The secret she had been keeping felt like a weight crushing her chest, and she knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to tell you something," Emma said when Jennifer answered. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Thick with tears, she had been fighting back since the search began. "Something Tyler told me before the trip. I should have said something earlier, but I was scared." Jennifer's heart began racing. Any new information could be the key to finding Marcus and Tyler. "What is it, Emma? Please, anything you can tell us might help." Emma took a shaky breath before continuing. Tyler had been looking at these hiking websites, forums, where people post about secret places in the Grand Canyon. He showed me pictures of hidden caves and slot canyons that aren't on the official park maps. He was really excited about exploring them. The revelation hit Jennifer like a physical blow. Tyler had always been adventurous, but she had assumed Marcus would keep him on the established trails. The idea that they might have ventured into unmapped areas changed everything about the search parameters. "He showed me this one forum post about ancient ruins hidden inside canyons," Emma continued, her words rushing together. "There were photos of petroglyphs and cliff dwellings that tourists never see." Tyler said it would be like discovering something new, like real exploration instead of just following tourist trails. Emma pulled up the saved screenshots on her phone, images Tyler had shared with her during their video calls while he planned the trip. The photos were grainy and poorly lit, taken by anonymous hikers who had ventured far from marked trails. One showed a narrow slot canyon with towering walls that seemed to close overhead. Another depicted ancient stone structures built into cliff faces, accessible only through technical climbing. "He made me promise not to tell his dad about the secret places," Emma whispered. "He said his father would worry too much and make them stick to the boring trails." Tyler wanted to surprise him with something amazing, something they would remember forever. The information sent shockwaves through the search operation. If Marcus and Tyler had attempted to reach these hidden locations, they could be anywhere in the canyon's vast network of unmarked passages. The search area, already impossibly large, had just expanded exponentially. Jennifer felt a mixture of hope and terror. Emma's revelation provided the first real clue about where Marcus and Tyler might have gone, but it also suggested they had ventured into some of the most dangerous and inaccessible areas of the Grand Canyon. The 3 weeks following the official suspension of the search operation marked the beginning of Jennifer Thompson's transformation from grieving mother to relentless investigator. She moved out of her Phoenix home and into a small motel room near the South Rim, unwilling to accept that Marcus and Tyler were simply gone forever. The modest savings account she had carefully built over years of teaching elementary school became her war chest in a battle against the canyon's silence. Jennifer hired Rocky Mountain Search and Rescue, a private company specializing in wilderness recovery operations. The cost was staggering, nearly $15,000 for a week-long intensive search, but she liquidated her retirement account without hesitation. Money meant nothing if there was even the smallest chance of bringing her family home. The private search teams brought equipment the Park Service couldn't justify for an extended operation: ground-penetrating radar to scan for bodies in areas where traditional searches had failed, thermal imaging drones capable of detecting decomposition heat signatures, professional cavers who could explore the unmapped cave systems that honeycombed the canyon walls. Marcus's brother David drove down from Colorado with a truck full of technical climbing gear and a grim determination that matched Jennifer's own. A former Army Ranger with mountaineering experience, David had skills the civilian search teams lacked. He spent his days rappelling into crevasses and exploring cliff faces that others deemed too dangerous to access. "We're not leaving until we find them," David told Jennifer one evening as they studied topographical maps by flashlight. "Marcus would do the same for me." The financial strain was crushing. Jennifer's teaching salary couldn't sustain the private search operations, the motel costs, and the time away from work. She started a GoFundMe campaign that raised over $30,000 from friends, colleagues, and strangers touched by the story. Local news stations covered her efforts, broadcasting her tearful pleas for anyone with information to come forward. But as summer turned to autumn, even the most optimistic volunteers began to lose hope. The canyon had been searched more thoroughly than perhaps any missing person case in its history. If Marcus and Tyler's bodies were anywhere accessible, they would have been found by now. Jennifer's obsession worried her friends and family. She had lost weight, barely sleeping, spending 18 hours a day coordinating search efforts or hiking remote trails herself. Her sister pleaded with her to return to Phoenix, to try to rebuild her life, but Jennifer couldn't abandon the vigil. "They're out there somewhere," she would say, staring into the canyon's depths as another fruitless day ended. "I can feel it. They're waiting for me to find them." The Grand Canyon had become both her salvation and her prison, the only place where hope still felt possible, even as that hope grew thinner with each passing day. Park Ranger Elena Rodriguez had been patrolling the Grand Canyon for 15 years, and in that time she had developed an instinct for cases that didn't fit the normal patterns. The Thompson disappearance bothered her in ways she couldn't initially articulate, like a persistent itch she couldn't scratch. While her colleagues had largely accepted the theory that Marcus and Tyler had succumbed to heat exhaustion in some remote corner of the canyon, Elena found herself returning to the case file during her off-duty hours. The cell phone data particularly troubled her. Tyler's phone pinging near Hermit Creek at 11:47 p.m. didn't match any logical hiking scenario. Elena had hiked that area countless times, and she knew it was virtually impossible to reach from Indian Garden in darkness without specialized equipment and extensive canyon experience. The terrain was treacherous even in daylight, with loose rock, hidden crevasses, and cliff faces that claimed experienced climbers. Elena began reviewing incident reports from the Hermit Creek area over the past several years. What she discovered made her increasingly uncomfortable. The remote drainage had been the site of numerous confrontations between park rangers and illegal campers. Drug-related arrests were surprisingly common in an area that should have been too difficult to access for casual criminal activity. The pattern that emerged painted a picture of a hidden ecosystem within the canyon, a network of people who had chosen to live off the grid in some of the most inaccessible areas of the park. Some were survivalists, seeking to escape modern society. Others were individuals with outstanding warrants or drug debts who needed to disappear completely. A few were simply lost souls who had walked into the canyon years earlier and never walked out. If stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share in the comments where you're watching from. Elena's investigation revealed that park authorities had been quietly dealing with this underground population for decades. Official policy was to remove illegal campers when they were discovered, but the vastness of the canyon made comprehensive enforcement impossible. Some of these individuals had been living in hidden alcoves and caves for years, creating semi-permanent settlements complete with water caches and supply routes. The most disturbing discovery came when Elena cross-referenced missing person reports with the areas where illegal campers had been active. While most disappearances in the canyon could be attributed to natural causes, there were several cases where hikers had vanished without a trace in areas known to be inhabited by the off-grid population. Elena's instincts told her that Marcus and Tyler Thompson hadn't died from heat exhaustion or fallen from a cliff. They had somehow encountered the canyon's hidden residents, and that encounter had ended badly. The cell phone ping near Hermit Creek wasn't evidence of poor navigation. It was evidence of a forced march into territory controlled by people who had very good reasons to ensure that outsiders never left to tell their stories. Elena knew she needed to pursue this theory carefully. The canyon's illegal residents were paranoid, violent, and intimately familiar with terrain where a wrong step could be fatal. Ranger Elena Rodriguez's investigation into the canyon's hidden population revealed a disturbing subculture that most park visitors never suspected existed. Deep within the most inaccessible areas of the Grand Canyon, a network of illegal residents had created a shadow society, complete with established territories, supply routes, and an unwritten code of silence that kept their existence hidden from authorities. The discovery began when Elena started mapping arrest records against topographical data. Over the past decade, park rangers had encountered dozens of individuals living illegally in remote areas, but the arrests represented only a fraction of the actual population. For every person caught and removed, Elena estimated that 3 or 4 others remained hidden in the canyon's labyrinth of caves, alcoves, and side canyons. Some of these off-grid residents were relatively harmless, aging hippies and survivalists who had walked into the canyon years earlier seeking escape from modern society. They lived in carefully concealed camps, surviving on cached supplies and rainwater collected in hidden containers. These individuals typically avoided contact with hikers and caused no direct problems beyond violating park regulations. But Elena's investigation revealed a more dangerous element within this underground community. Drug dealers had discovered that the canyon's remote areas provided perfect hiding spots for manufacturing and distributing methamphetamine and other illegal substances. The rugged terrain made detection nearly impossible, and the transient nature of the hiking population provided a steady stream of potential customers. The most troubling discovery came when Elena interviewed Jake Morrison, a former park maintenance worker who had been arrested for drug possession in the Hermit Creek area 2 years earlier. Morrison had spent 6 months living illegally in the canyon before his arrest, and his knowledge of the hidden population was extensive. "There's people back there who haven't seen civilization in 5-6 years, Morrison told Elena during a recorded interview. Some of them are running from warrants. Others are just completely off their heads on drugs. They've got camps set up in places you'd never think to look, caves that go back hundreds of feet into the rock." Morrison described a territorial system where different groups controlled specific areas of the canyon. Newcomers who stumbled into established territories were often met with violence, especially if they threatened to expose the illegal activities. Bodies could be disposed of easily in the countless crevasses and unmarked graves that dotted the remote areas. If someone walked into the wrong camp at the wrong time, Morrison explained, they might not walk out at all. There's some seriously dangerous people back there, people who would kill to protect what they've built. Elena felt a chill as she considered the implications. Marcus and Tyler Thompson, with their bright orange backpacks and obvious tourist status, would have been immediately recognizable as outsiders if they had encountered any of these hidden residents. The cell phone data suggesting they had traveled to the Hermit Creek area took on a much more sinister meaning in this context. The January snow fell silently on the south rim as geology graduate student Amanda Chen made her way down an unmarked trail in the Hermit Creek drainage. 6 months had passed since the massive search for Marcus and Tyler Thompson had been officially suspended, and the canyon had returned to its normal rhythm of seasonal visitors and routine operations. Amanda was conducting research on rock formations for her dissertation, focusing on areas rarely visited by tourists or park personnel. The remote side canyon she was exploring required technical rappelling skills to access, which explained why it had been overlooked during the initial search efforts. Amanda had chosen this location specifically because of its isolation, hoping to find undisturbed geological samples for her research. The winter weather had cleared most hikers from the more accessible areas, leaving her alone with the ancient stone walls and the whisper of wind through the narrow passages. Amanda was carefully documenting a particularly interesting rock striation when a flash of color caught her eye. Wedged against a thorny bush about 50 feet below her position was a small piece of fabric, bright orange against the muted desert tones of the canyon walls. The color was so vivid and obviously artificial that it stood out like a beacon in the natural landscape. Her heart began racing as she realized the significance of what she was seeing. Amanda had followed the Thompson case closely through news reports and social media, and she distinctly remembered the descriptions of Tyler's bright orange hiking shirt. The fabric appeared to be synthetic material, the type used in modern outdoor gear, and it was clearly recent rather than something that had been weathering in the elements for years. Amanda carefully rappelled down to the fabric's location, her hands shaking as she photographed it from multiple angles before carefully removing it from the thorny branches. The piece was roughly 6 inches square, torn along one edge as if it had been ripped from a larger garment. The material showed signs of recent damage, with fresh tears, and what appeared to be small stains that could have been blood. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation when Amanda immediately contacted park authorities. This was the first tangible evidence that Marcus and Tyler Thompson had traveled far beyond their planned route, venturing into areas that required advanced technical skills to access. The location was over 12 miles from Indian Garden, in terrain so challenging that most experienced canyon hikers would never attempt to reach it. More importantly, the fabric's location aligned perfectly with Ranger Elena Rodriguez's theory about the canyon's hidden population. The Hermit Creek drainage was known to harbor illegal camps and had been the site of numerous confrontations with off-grid residents. The discovery suggested that the Thompsons hadn't simply gotten lost or succumbed to heat exhaustion, but had somehow been drawn into the dangerous world of the canyon's underground society. For the first time in 6 months, investigators had a concrete lead to follow. The discovery of Tyler's orange fabric transformed the investigation from a cold case into an active search operation focused on one of the Grand Canyon's most treacherous areas. Within hours of Amanda Chen's report, Incident Commander Sarah Chen was coordinating a specialized technical rescue team equipped for the challenging terrain of the Hermit Creek drainage. This wasn't the broad search of the previous summer, but a targeted operation following the first concrete lead in 6 months. The fabric's location required an entirely different approach than the earlier searches. The narrow side canyon where Amanda had made her discovery was accessible only through technical rappelling, and the rock walls showed clear evidence of recent human activity. Rope marks on the canyon rim suggested that someone had used climbing gear to access the area, but whether it was the Thompsons themselves or someone else remained unclear. Lead investigator Detective Mark Rodriguez arrived from Flagstaff with a team of forensic specialists trained in outdoor crime scene analysis. The orange fabric was carefully preserved as evidence, while the team established a secure perimeter around the discovery site. Every inch of the surrounding area was photographed and mapped, using GPS coordinates to ensure nothing was overlooked. The search pattern expanded outward from Amanda's discovery point, with teams rappelling into adjacent canyons and exploring every accessible alcove and cave system. What they found painted a disturbing picture of the area's recent history. Hidden among the rock formations were clear signs of semi-permanent human habitation: fire rings constructed from stacked stones, food caches stored in waterproof containers, and improvised shelters built into natural alcoves. Most significantly, the teams discovered evidence of territorial markings, spray-painted symbols on rock faces that appeared to be some form of communication system among the canyon's illegal residents. The markings were fresh, applied within the past year, and they seemed to delineate specific areas of control or influence. Detective Rodriguez had worked similar cases involving off-grid populations in other wilderness areas, and he recognized the signs of an established underground community. These weren't random squatters or lost hikers, but organized groups with defined territories and rules for maintaining their hidden existence. The search teams also found disturbing evidence of violence in the area. Scattered among the camping debris were items that clearly didn't belong to survivalists or casual illegal campers. A broken watch, its band torn as if ripped from someone's wrist in a struggle. Scattered coins and a credit card holder, the contents suggesting they had been rifled through and discarded. Most chilling was the discovery of what appeared to be a hastily constructed cairn, a stack of stones that could mark either a trail or something far more sinister. When carefully dismantled under forensic supervision, the cairn revealed disturbed soil beneath, though no remains were immediately visible. The evidence suggested that Marcus and Tyler Thompson had indeed ventured into this remote area, but their encounter with the canyon's hidden residents had taken a violent turn. The investigation was no longer about finding lost hikers. It was about solving a double homicide in one of America's most challenging crime scenes. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tommy Valdez, a 23-year-old from Flagstaff, had been arrested on drug possession charges completely unrelated to the Thompson case. During his interrogation, he mentioned spending time in the Grand Canyon's remote areas, and Detective Rodriguez's ears perked up when Valdez described the hidden community he had encountered in the Hermit Creek drainage. Valdez had lived illegally in the canyon for 3 months during the summer of 2019, the same period when Marcus and Tyler Thompson had disappeared. His knowledge of the off-grid population was extensive and deeply unsettling. He described a complex hierarchy among the illegal residents, with different groups controlling specific territories and engaging in various criminal activities to sustain their hidden existence. "There's maybe 40 or 50 people living back there permanently," Valdez told Detective Rodriguez during a recorded interview. "Most of them are running from something: warrants, drug debts, family problems. They've set up camps in places tourists would never find, caves that go back into the rock for hundreds of feet." Valdez described a thriving drug operation centered in the most inaccessible areas of the canyon. Methamphetamine labs had been constructed in remote caves, taking advantage of the natural ventilation and virtually impossible detection by law enforcement. The rugged terrain made raids nearly impossible, and the transient nature of the hiking population provided both customers and cover for the illegal activities. More disturbing were Valdez's descriptions of territorial violence among the different groups. Newcomers who stumbled into established areas were often met with extreme hostility, especially if they threatened to expose the operations to authorities. Several illegal residents carried weapons, and disputes over territory or resources sometimes turned deadly. "There's this one guy, they call him Canyon," Valdez continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Real name is something like Morrison, I think. He's been back there for years, totally paranoid, thinks everyone's a federal agent or something. He's got a reputation for making problems disappear, if you know what I mean." Detective Rodriguez felt his pulse quicken. The description of Canyon Morrison matched information from Ranger Elena Rodriguez's investigation into the area's illegal population. Morrison was a known violent offender who had been living in the remote areas for over 3 years, avoiding multiple outstanding warrants. Valdez's most chilling revelation came when Rodriguez showed him photos of Marcus and Tyler Thompson. Valdez's face went pale as he recognized the images. "I saw them," he said quietly. "2 guys with orange backpacks, a father and son. This was back in June, right around the time I was getting ready to leave the canyon. They looked lost, way off the main trails. Canyon Morrison was talking about some tourists who had wandered into his territory, said they were asking too many questions about the camps. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. Marcus and Tyler Thompson hadn't died from natural causes. They had encountered the canyon's hidden criminal population and posed a threat that couldn't be allowed to leave the wilderness alive. 1 year and 3 months after Marcus and Tyler Thompson vanished into the Grand Canyon, experienced canyoneer David Chen was pursuing his passion for exploring the most remote and challenging areas of the park. Chen had been descending into slot canyons for over 15 years, drawn to the technical challenges and pristine beauty of places where few humans had ever set foot. His current expedition focused on the extremely remote Escalante Creek drainage, an area so difficult to access that it required advanced rope work and multiple days of approach hiking. Chen was working his way through a narrow slot canyon that twisted deep into the earth, its walls rising hundreds of feet overhead and narrowing to just a few feet wide in places. The technical challenges were immense, requiring careful anchor placement and precise rope work to navigate the vertical drops and water-carved obstacles. This was exactly the type of terrain that drew Chen to canyoneering: pristine wilderness where he could test his skills against nature's most challenging puzzles. As he rappelled down a particularly steep section, something glinted in the filtered sunlight streaming through the narrow opening far above. Chen paused on his rope, squinting at what appeared to be metal objects wedged into a small alcove about 20 feet below his position. His initial assumption was typical canyon debris, perhaps climbing gear left behind by previous explorers or natural mineral deposits that caught the light. But as Chen descended closer to the objects, his excitement turned to unease. What he was seeing didn't belong in this pristine environment. The alcove contained clearly manufactured items, gear that someone had either dropped or deliberately placed in this nearly inaccessible location. Chen's trained eye immediately recognized outdoor equipment, backpacking gear that had no business being in a slot canyon, that required expert technical skills to reach. Among the scattered items, Chen spotted a distinctive camera strap, bright yellow with black trim, and a stainless steel water bottle that bore commercial markings. Both items appeared to be relatively recent, not weathered enough to have been in the canyon for years. But most disturbing was the way the gear was distributed, scattered as if it had been dumped rather than carefully placed or accidentally dropped. Chen's years of wilderness experience had taught him to recognize when something was seriously wrong. The location was impossibly remote, requiring multiple days of technical climbing to access. The gear suggested that someone had either made an extraordinary effort to reach this spot or had been brought here against their will. As Chen carefully photographed the scene with his waterproof camera, he realized he might have stumbled upon evidence related to one of the Grand Canyon's most notorious unsolved cases. The discovery would soon transform the Thompson investigation from a cold case into an active crime scene, providing the first concrete evidence of what had happened to the missing father and son in the summer of 2019. David Chen's discovery triggered the largest crime scene operation in Grand Canyon National Park history. Within 6 hours of his emergency satellite phone call, a specialized team of FBI forensic experts was being helicoptered into the remote Escalante Creek drainage. The logistical challenge was immense, requiring multiple helicopter trips to transport equipment and personnel into terrain so inaccessible that it had never been properly mapped by park authorities. The slot canyon where Chen had made his discovery became a carefully controlled crime scene. Agent Patricia Williams, a forensic specialist with 20 years of experience in outdoor investigations, supervised the meticulous documentation of every item found in the hidden alcove. The yellow camera strap and stainless steel water bottle were photographed in their original positions before being carefully collected as evidence. But the forensic team's investigation revealed far more than Chen had initially observed. Hidden beneath loose rocks and debris were additional personal items that painted a disturbing picture of violence. A torn hiking boot, its laces cut rather than untied, suggested someone had been forcibly restrained. Scattered coins and a cracked smartphone case indicated that pockets had been searched and valuables removed. Most significantly, the forensic team discovered biological evidence that confirmed their worst fears. Blood spatter analysis revealed multiple impact patterns on the canyon walls, indicating a violent struggle had occurred in this remote location. The distribution and characteristics of the blood suggested that at least 2 people had suffered significant trauma in the confined space of the alcove. Agent Williams used specialized equipment to test the blood samples for DNA, but the extreme heat and UV exposure of the canyon environment had degraded most genetic material beyond useful analysis. However, preliminary field tests confirmed that the blood was human and relatively recent, consistent with the timeline of the Thompson disappearance. The forensic team also discovered evidence of attempts to conceal the crime. Fire-damaged clothing fragments suggested that someone had tried to burn evidence, though the stone walls of the slot canyon had prevented complete destruction. Tool marks on the rock surfaces indicated that someone had used implements to chip away at areas where blood had pooled, attempting to remove traces of the violence. The location itself told a chilling story. The alcove was positioned in such a way that sounds would be completely muffled by the surrounding canyon walls. Victims brought to this location would be unable to call for help, and their voices would never carry beyond the immediate area. The spot had been chosen deliberately by someone with intimate knowledge of the canyon's acoustic properties. Agent Williams's preliminary report concluded that Marcus and Tyler Thompson had been murdered in this remote location. Their bodies subsequently moved to an even more inaccessible disposal site. The crime scene evidence suggested careful planning and execution by someone familiar with both the terrain and forensic investigation techniques. The case had officially become a double homicide investigation, and the focus shifted to identifying the perpetrator who had used the Grand Canyon's most remote areas as the perfect location for murder and concealment. The forensic evidence from the Escalante Creek crime scene led investigators to focus their attention on the Grand Canyon's illegal population, specifically targeting individuals with histories of violence and territorial behavior. Tommy Valdez's previous testimony about Canyon Morrison had already placed him at the top of the suspect list, but tracking down someone who had been successfully evading law enforcement for over 3 years proved to be a formidable challenge. FBI agent Sarah Martinez coordinated with park rangers to compile a comprehensive profile of Jeremiah Morrison, the man known in the canyon's underground community simply as Canyon. Morrison's criminal history painted a picture of escalating violence and paranoia. He had served time for assault and battery in Arizona, escaped from a minimum security facility in 2016, and had been living off the grid ever since. Witnesses described him as intelligent but deeply unstable, convinced that federal agents were constantly hunting him. The investigation revealed that Morrison had been spotted in the Hermit Creek area multiple times during the summer of 2019, the exact time frame when Marcus and Tyler Thompson had disappeared. Rangers who had encountered him described a man in his 40s, heavily bearded, with an intimidating physical presence and extensive knowledge of the canyon's most remote areas. He was known to carry weapons and had threatened hikers who ventured too close to his hidden camps. Agent Martinez's team discovered that Morrison had established a network of supply caches throughout the remote areas of the canyon, enabling him to move freely through terrain that would challenge even experienced wilderness experts. He had created multiple hideouts in caves and alcoves, some equipped with stolen camping gear and non-perishable food supplies that allowed him to remain hidden for weeks at a time. The breakthrough came when investigators analyzed items recovered from the crime scene against Morrison's known possessions. A distinctive multi-tool found near the Escalante Creek alcove bore serial numbers that matched equipment reported stolen from a canyon supply cache 3 months before the Thompson disappearance. The tool showed traces of blood that, while too degraded for DNA analysis, confirmed it had been used in the violent encounter. More damning was the discovery of Marcus Thompson's distinctive orange backpack in a secondary cave system that Morrison was known to frequent. The backpack had been partially burned in an apparent attempt to destroy evidence, but enough remained to provide positive identification through manufacturer labels and unique wear patterns that Jennifer Thompson could verify. Agent Martinez knew they were closing in on their suspect, but Morrison's intimate knowledge of the canyon terrain made him extremely dangerous to pursue. He had turned the Grand Canyon's most remote areas into a fortress where he could disappear at will, and any attempt to capture him would require careful planning and overwhelming force. The hunt for Canyon Morrison was about to begin in some of the most challenging terrain in North America, where one wrong step could send pursuers plummeting to their deaths. The manhunt for Jeremiah Morrison began at dawn on a crisp October morning, involving the largest coordinated law enforcement operation in Grand Canyon National Park history. FBI tactical teams, park rangers, and specialized wilderness tracking units converged on the remote areas where Morrison was known to operate. The challenge was immense, pursuing a suspect who had turned the canyon's most inaccessible terrain into his personal fortress, where he could disappear into unmapped cave systems at will. Agent Sarah Martinez coordinated the operation from a command post established at the South Rim, using topographical maps and satellite imagery to track the multiple teams spread across hundreds of square miles of rugged wilderness. Morrison's network of hideouts had been identified through months of investigation, but his intimate knowledge of the terrain gave him a significant advantage over his pursuers. The first encounter came on the second day of the search. A tactical team rappelling into a narrow side canyon spotted Morrison's distinctive silhouette moving through a boulder field nearly a mile away. By the time they reached the location, he had vanished completely, leaving only footprints in the sand and the cold remains of a hastily abandoned campfire. Morrison's evasion tactics revealed the extent of his wilderness skills. He moved primarily at night, using game trails and natural pathways that didn't appear on any official maps. During daylight hours, he retreated to caves and alcoves where thermal imaging equipment couldn't detect his presence. He had cached supplies throughout the area, allowing him to remain mobile without carrying heavy equipment that would slow his movement. The pursuit became a deadly game of cat and mouse across some of the most dangerous terrain in North America. Morrison led his pursuers through areas where a single misstep could result in fatal falls, forcing the tactical teams to move slowly and cautiously while he maintained his lead. He seemed to know exactly where the search teams were positioned, suggesting he had established observation posts that allowed him to monitor their movements. 3 more close encounters ended with Morrison disappearing into terrain so treacherous that pursuit became impossible. He used narrow slot canyons as escape routes, squeezing through openings barely wide enough for a human body. His knowledge of the cave systems was encyclopedic, and he could vanish into underground passages that emerged miles away from the entry points. The psychological pressure of the pursuit began to show on Morrison's behavior. Search teams found evidence of increasingly erratic actions, abandoned camps where he had apparently fled in panic, leaving behind valuable supplies and equipment. His movements became more desperate and unpredictable, suggesting that the constant pressure was wearing down even his formidable survival skills. Agent Martinez knew that time was working against both the search teams and their quarry. Winter weather was approaching, which would make the pursuit even more dangerous, but it would also limit Morrison's ability to survive in the high-altitude areas of the canyon. The net was slowly tightening, and Morrison was running out of places to hide. The end came in a narrow box canyon deep in the Hermit Creek drainage, where sheer rock walls rose 300 feet on all sides, creating a natural prison with only one entrance. Morrison had made a fatal tactical error in his desperation to escape the tightening net of searchers. The canyon he had chosen as a hiding spot was actually a dead end, and FBI tactical teams had quietly positioned themselves at the single exit point during the night. Agent Sarah Martinez approached the canyon entrance at first light, accompanied by a negotiation specialist and a tactical team armed with non-lethal weapons. Morrison's desperate 3-week flight through the Grand Canyon's most treacherous terrain had finally come to an end. Thermal imaging confirmed his presence deep within the box canyon, trapped in an alcove with no escape route. "Jeremiah Morrison, this is the FBI," Agent Martinez called through a bullhorn, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. "You're surrounded, and there's no way out. We want to resolve this peacefully." The response was immediate and violent. Morrison opened fire with a hunting rifle, the shots ricocheting wildly off the rock walls and sending the tactical team scrambling for cover behind boulders. His accuracy was poor due to exhaustion and the challenging angles, but his desperation made him extremely dangerous. The standoff lasted nearly 6 hours. Morrison's position in the alcove provided excellent cover, but it also meant he had no access to water or additional ammunition. The psychological pressure of being trapped, combined with weeks of constant pursuit, began to break down his defenses. As the afternoon sun heated the canyon floor to over 100 degrees, Morrison's rifle fire became sporadic and poorly aimed. Agent Martinez could hear him talking to himself, his voice carrying clearly in the confined space, but the words too garbled to understand. The stress of the pursuit had clearly taken a severe psychological toll. The breakthrough came when Morrison's rifle jammed during what appeared to be his final stand. In the sudden silence that followed, Agent Martinez heard something that chilled her blood, the sound of Morrison sobbing uncontrollably. The man who had terrorized the canyon's remote areas for years had finally reached his breaking point. "I can't do this anymore," Morrison shouted, his voice cracking with exhaustion and despair. "They were just supposed to leave. They weren't supposed to see the lab." The confession came pouring out in a torrent of guilt and justification. Morrison described how Marcus and Tyler Thompson had stumbled upon his methamphetamine operation while exploring off-trail areas. Their discovery threatened everything he had built, and his paranoid mind convinced him that they were federal agents conducting surveillance. "I didn't want to kill them," Morrison continued, his voice echoing off the canyon walls, "but they knew too much. They would have destroyed everything." With his ammunition exhausted and no escape possible, Morrison finally surrendered, emerging from the alcove with his hands raised in defeat. The manhunt that had captivated the nation was finally over. The trial of Jeremiah Morrison began in federal court in Phoenix 8 months after his capture, drawing national media attention to a case that had captivated the public imagination. Morrison faced 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Marcus and Tyler Thompson, along with additional charges related to his illegal drug operation and weapons violations. The evidence against him was overwhelming, built on forensic analysis, witness testimony, and his own recorded confession in the box canyon. Jennifer Thompson sat in the front row of the courtroom every day, her presence a constant reminder of the human cost of Morrison's crimes. She had waited over 2 years for this moment, and despite the pain of reliving the details of her family's final hours, she was determined to see justice served. The prosecution presented a methodical case that traced Marcus and Tyler's final movements from their campsite at Indian Garden to their violent deaths in the remote Escalante Creek drainage. Morrison's defense team attempted to argue that the killings were the result of a psychological breakdown caused by years of isolation and untreated mental illness. They presented evidence of his deteriorating mental state and claimed that his paranoid delusions had led him to perceive the Thompsons as federal agents rather than innocent hikers. The strategy failed to resonate with jurors who heard recordings of Morrison's calculated attempts to destroy evidence and conceal the crime scene. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Morrison was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never again threaten hikers in the Grand Canyon's remote areas. During the sentencing hearing, he offered a brief apology to Jennifer Thompson, but his words seemed hollow and self-serving rather than genuinely remorseful. Despite the conviction, one crucial question remained unanswered. Morrison had steadfastly refused to reveal the location where he had disposed of Marcus and Tyler's bodies, taking that secret with him to federal prison. Multiple search efforts in the areas he had frequented yielded no trace of the remains, leaving Jennifer without the closure of bringing her family home for proper burial. In the years following the trial, Jennifer channeled her grief into advocacy work. She established the Thompson Foundation for Canyon Safety, which provided GPS tracking devices to backcountry hikers and funded improved communication systems in remote areas of national parks. She successfully lobbied for legislation requiring safety equipment for wilderness permits and enhanced ranger patrols in areas known to harbor illegal activity. Jennifer continued to make annual pilgrimages to the Grand Canyon, hiking the trails that Marcus and Tyler had loved while carrying their memory forward. The canyon remained a place of both beauty and heartbreak, where the line between adventure and tragedy could disappear as quickly as two hikers vanishing into the vast wilderness. The case served as a stark reminder that even in America's most treasured natural spaces, darkness could hide in the deepest shadows, waiting for unsuspecting victims who wandered too far from the safety of marked trails.